Indivisible Lehigh Valley Bethlehem is a newly launched regional grassroots volunteer organization affiliated with the network of nationwide affiliates of indivisible.org. This is our monthly meeting podcast episode.
Rich Logis, who is from leavingmaga.org. Please go to the website, make a donation. Rich spoke at the Democratic National Convention last autumn. I had seen him there, and I remembered after Julie told me about him. And Julie had found out about him because of Salon Magazine. There was an article on him there. I've seen him on the Midas Touch podcast and many, many different outlets. He told me in text yesterday that a magazine in Germany had reached out to him doing a piece on American politics. So ironically, just when I was sitting down to text Rich on Friday afternoon to confirm, I sat down in front of the TV, taking a break, and put on Nicole Wallace, and there he was. It was so kismet. It was really crazy. And so until 2022, Rich was a true believing MAGA American, an activist. He supported Trump and MAGA for what he thought were the right reasons, but discovered he was wrong. Now Rich works tirelessly to make amends through his advocacy and nonprofit. He's written free ebooks to help folks leave MAGA, My MAGA Odyssey, and communicate to those still in the MAGA community, how to talk to your friends and family in the MAGA community. Rich is joining us, obviously. I believe Rich lives in Florida, so he's joining us via a large screen Zoom. We are really grateful he's here. I know personally there's some people that I know in our group that have had challenges with either family or close friends that are real into the MAGA cult. I don't know what else we can call it. This was the perfect bookend to our last May meeting where we had member Spencer Snigg speak on, and he's raising your hand, you're in the back, on raising our awareness on political cults. And Spencer has a 5-part series that's streaming on Prime and I think Tubi, is it? Okay. It's a 5-part series on brainwashing of all sorts, but he spoke more specifically to us at our last general meeting on political brainwashing, but more of a general broad stroke. Now we're here to talk about the MAGA cult. And so with that, I'm going to take it away. Thank you, Rich.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. Had I met all of you when I was in the MAGA community, I would have deemed all of you to be existential threats to my life, my livelihood, my family, and my country. And for that, I want to say that I'm sorry. I helped the president divide our country. I was culpable in tearing asunder relationships, friendships, families, communities, and places of worship. I was complicit in amplifying conspiracy theories that undoubtedly caused injury and trauma to others. And I'm doing this work right now to try to make amends for my past and to ask all of you to consider offering grace to those willing to change and willing to seek genuine penitence and contrition. May 24th, 2022. I've got one hand white-knuckled on my steering wheel, and my other hand is resting on my AR-15 on my passenger seat. On the radio are reports of the Uvalde, Texas school shooting. As a parent of 2 children, I'm listening to this report knowing that there have been casualties, including children. And in that moment, my mind wanders all the way back to the beginning of my MAGA Odyssey. In 2015, I was someone who was politically lonely. I was cynical. I was pessimistic. I believed that both parties were the same. And I believe that most government failed to represent most Americans and only cared about the wealthy and the powerful. I was not someone who believed that a simple change was needed. I believed that the entire established political order needed to be obliterated. And when Trump decided to run, even though he ran as a Republican, he did run as an outsider. No political experience, no military experience, no government experience. If we recall, before Trump declared his candidacy, the election in 2016 was going to be Jeb Bush versus Hillary Clinton. And even apolitical friends of mine at the time said to me, Rich, didn't we war against a monarchy to claim our autonomy and our independence? Now we're going to have political dynasties. So even politically indifferent friends of mine recognized that we were facing another Clinton or another Bush presidency. So when Trump ran, he did run with what I believe to be outsider appeal. And even though he was an abrasive person, I believed at the time that he was an honest person. Now, this is a chance for all of you to get your chuckles out about Donald Trump being an honest person, but it's what we believed at the time. And also, Donald Trump raised, when he ran, some valid economic concerns about jobs being shipped overseas, about once vibrant communities that were hollowed out. Then and now, there is a lot of economic trauma that so many Americans have felt, and Donald Trump tapped into that. And trauma and the MAGA appeal are inextricably linked. There are so many of our leaders who have given testimonials at Leaving MAGA who have endured some kind of trauma, whether it was economic, whether it was familial, whether it was racial trauma, whether it was indoctrination of Christian nationalism at their church. There is no question about the link between trauma and the appeal of MAGA. And for me, I was not just a partisan Trump voter. In late 2015, early 2016, I took my support to the next level and I became a volunteer for the Trump campaign. I did phone banking. I showed people where to get registered to vote. I helped people get registered to vote. I recruited people to support Trump. I even wrote part of the call script for the Trump campaign, and my contribution to that call script read, "Let's make history and elect Donald Trump president." So I was more than just a partisan supporter. I wanted an active role in helping Trump get elected because I believed that had Hillary and the Democrats won in 2016, that the Democrats would have seized power indefinitely. Hearing myself say that now, I realize how delusional it is to say it, but it's what I believed at the time. And I was around others who also felt that way. And I allowed myself to be influenced into that way of thinking. And it was in early 2016 when I made the decision to go all in on Trump, and I believed that he was the only Republican who could win. And after the victory in 2016, where I was vindicated and our efforts were validated, I took my MAGA support to the next level. It wasn't a case of, okay, we won, see you in 4 years. I decided to become a podcaster. I wrote dozens and dozens and dozens of articles for right-wing media. I wrote and had bylines in places like Fox and The Federalist, Real Clear Politics. I even wrote stories for a site called WorldNet Daily, which is the site that originated the Obama birther conspiracy. So MAGA for me was exhilarating. It was exciting. It was enthralling. It was new. It was novel. It was unprecedented. It was historic. And most of all, it was communal. It was a community for me. It was a community, as it is right now, for other MAGA Americans, where we experience camaraderie, and MAGA provides a sense of gathering for people. And in my time in MAGA, my belief that I shared with others within the community was that anyone who was opposed to us, we considered, as I said at the outset, an existential threat to us. If someone was not 100% with us, they were 100% against us. So if someone was 99.99% with us, they were considered 0% with us. And that way of thinking was how I lived my life on a daily basis. For me, MAGA was not just about politics. It was my identity. It was my being. It was my personhood. My MAGA community was my second family. And that second family, as embarrassed as I am to admit this, oftentimes took precedence over my own blood family. And I neglected some of my familial duties as a parent and as a husband. But there was not a day that went by for years that I did not communicate or see my fellow MAGA compatriots here in Florida, where I've lived since 2012. So forget about taking a day off from MAGA. I never took an hour off from it. It was my life. I was completely consumed by my political activism. And I considered myself, like all in MAGA, we considered ourselves real Americans. And the patriots and everybody who opposed us, they were the unpatriotic Americans and they were the fake Americans. So if someone was a Christian Democrat, they were not a real Christian. If there was a Jewish Democrat, they were not a real Jew. This was the kind of rhetoric that we engaged in. This was the kind of vitriol that I used to dehumanize others and vilify others whom I determined to be against us in MAGA. And I also trafficked in, at the time, I didn't realize it, but came to understand mis and disinformation. Right-wing media thrives because of how much it lies. And it is very difficult to compete against shamelessness. And there is nothing that right-wing media and Donald Trump will not lie about. Doesn't matter how small, medium, or large the issue is. At my DNC talk that I gave last year, I said in that talk, in that presentation I gave, that Donald Trump's toxic superpower is lying. And I helped him spread those lies by trafficking in mis and disinformation. Now, what were some of the reasons that I started to question my belief system in MAGA? I like to paraphrase the late Ernest Hemingway in saying that my epiphany happened gradually and then suddenly all at once. I knew that the president was mismanaging the pandemic. I did not support what happened on January 6th. I didn't believe that the election was stolen. I remember telling my fellow MAGA Floridians and also writing in my articles that I believed that there would be a massive turnout against Trump in 2020, and it turned out that there was. It's why I never believed that former President Biden won by fraud. And even though I didn't support January 6th, I also thought it was hyperbolized into a bigger deal than it really was. And what upset me about that day wasn't so much the violence and knowing that there were attacks against our democracy and police officers. What angered me about that day more than anything is that I saw the riot and the insurrection as potentially harming our chances of a 2024 comeback. So that's how I responded to the insurrection. I am not proud of that response, but it is what I thought at the time as it was happening. So mismanagement of COVID, January 6th, stolen election lies, they showed cracks, but they weren't enough for me to leave. The first accelerant for me in leaving was actually not Donald Trump. It was my governor, Ron DeSantis. If you recall, in the summer and fall of 2021, there was the COVID Delta surge. And that surge was harming children. Children were befalling ill with COVID. There were cases across the country of children dying. What Ron DeSantis did at the time, as that was happening, and this virus was ravaging not just children, but all age groups, is he platformed anti-vaxxers at his pressers. And when he did that, it shocked me and it caused a lot of confusion. I did not understand why it was that he was doing that. And so I decided to do something at that time that sounds very, very simple, but was so profoundly life-changing and altering for me as I diversified my news and information sources. And I came to slowly start to realize that a lot of what I believed may not have been true. My belief, for example, that Democrats were coming for our guns, or that Democrats and liberals were importing brown people to replace white people to seize power indefinitely, or that public schools were indoctrinating our children into transgender Marxist ideology. I started to widen my aperture. I started to step outside of the right-wing media echo chamber. And as I did that, I spent a lot of nights in solitude in the evenings with just my thoughts and I, struggling with a reality that I had to painfully but liberatingly come to, that I was wrong about a lot of beliefs. And it wasn't just one or two beliefs, it was years accumulated of them. There was also a better understanding of January 6th for me after I diversified my news and information sources. And I realized that it wasn't just hobbyists like the Proud Boys, which is what I thought that they were, who decided to ransack the Capitol. No, I realized that these groups who orchestrated what happened on January 6th had the blessing of the most powerful person in the history of the world. And if we recall back in February of 2022, the Republican Party called January 6th legitimate political discourse. And for me, the final straw was the Uvalde, Texas school shooting. And on that day, as I held my AR-15 on my passenger seat, I was en route to go and sell that godforsaken assault rifle because I can no longer support what the Republican Party and Donald Trump and MAGA had become. Now, I know that Donald Trump wasn't president on the day of Uvalde, but I knew exactly what his response would be, and I knew exactly what the Republican Party's response would be. And it was shortly thereafter Uvalde that I quietly left MAGA. But there was something that was gnawing at me because I had always been so unapologetically public in my support for Trump that I felt I needed to reciprocate that, and I needed to be unapologetically public in my renunciation of MAGA. And so it was on August 30th of 2022, I wrote a mea culpa. And in that article, I said that I was sorry for my support of Trump, DeSantis, and MAGA, that I had made a mistake, and that I wanted to apologize to anyone I may have hurt with my words and deeds. So August 30th of 2022 is what I call my Leaving MAGA-versary. And I've got another one coming up, thankfully, not in a not too distant future. The God's honest truth, folks, is that when I wrote that mea culpa, I never actually thought that anybody would care. But the moment that I published it, if you can imagine for a moment the visual, I've got my hand on the mouse. The arrow is over the publish button. On one hand, I'm exhilarated because I feel that this is where my life has taken me. And on this odyssey, I needed to finally sever myself from MAGA. But there was also a fear because MAGA had been so much of who I was as a person that I knew that if I published that story, that there was a permanence, and that permanence, there was still a gravitational pull back to MAGA in that moment. But I published it, and the moment that I did it, I knew it was the correct decision. And after it came out, instantaneously, I received messages from people asking me to talk to their friends and their family and their loved ones and their sons and their daughters and their best men at their weddings and maidens of honor. I was completely naive and oblivious to just how many people I had contributed to creating strained relationships. MAGA strained my own relationships at home with my wife and with my children. And I was ignorant to the fact that so many other relationships had been torn asunder by this movement. And I spent the next year being asked by organizations and media to go and tell my story. And it was from that time of telling that story that Leaving MAGA as an organization was born. And so after coming out of MAGA, I call the way I refer to myself coming out of MAGA is I refer to myself as a born again human being. And I no longer vilified and dehumanize those with whom I disagree with. I know that there's lots that MAGA does where they go low. And I know that there's a temptation to sometimes want to go low in response. So I understand those feelings. But after leaving MAGA, I made a decision to continue to go high when MAGA goes low. When others go low, I would ask that all of us resist the temptation to go low, and that we keep the discourse, which I'm going to get to in a moment, that we go high. I also would like to think that I became a little less cynical. And I have to admit, as I do my sign of the cross as a Catholic here, that I still have to fight my cynicism, folks, sometimes. But leaving MAGA, it it made me a less cynical person, and it made me a less panicked person, because something that happens in MAGA for myself and for those who are current adherents to it is it creates these perpetual states of desperation and panic and despair and fear and rage and paranoia and hopelessness. And to use a fancy term from my theology courses, this all or none nihilism. That was my life in MAGA. It was a constant reaction to what I believed were enemies behind every single tree. And leaving MAGA made me realize that I was wrong, because there were two parts about leaving that were so excruciating for me. Leaving was a tumultuous time of turmoil for me. The first reason that made it so hard is that I knew that I was walking away from a community, that second family. And I knew that the moment that I decided to leave MAGA, all of those relationships, all the camaraderie, all the times that we got together for holiday events and birthday parties and events for our kids, I knew that that was all going to go away. And the other part that made it so difficult was that it wasn't just a belief or two that I was wrong about. It was years of accumulated beliefs that I came to understand that I was mistaken about, and that I had allowed myself to be influenced into believing. And there's a part of this, folks, that I want to offer for all of you to think about. I take responsibility for my actions, my words, my deeds, and my rhetoric. But I would ask all of you to think about, as we get into a moment on how to talk to our MAGA friends and family, to please keep in mind that all of us are susceptible to being influenced. And I allowed myself to be influenced into so much of what it was that I thought. All of the lies of MAGA are designed to exploit and manipulate followers. I know this because I can attest to it, having lived it. Those lies exploited and manipulated myself, and I allowed that to happen. So the leaving of the community and the acknowledgement of believing lies made it so hard for me to leave, but I knew that I could no longer support defending unnecessary deaths and suffering, and I could no longer justify politically motivated violence. Those were my two lines of demarcation. And I decided last year, as part of my own work of leaving, I decided to found Leaving MAGA. And what we are as an organization is we are a new community for people who leave and decide to tell their stories, a new community for people who are having doubts, and also a place for friends and family of those who are still in the thrall of MAGA. I'm happy to report to everyone that we are currently right now speaking to people who were Donald Trump voters in 2024 who are now starting to have doubts. And they are considering coming forward and telling their stories with us because they themselves have gotten to a point where it's one lie too many for them. So we're a new community, we're a new destination, we're an exit ramp, we're an off ramp for people who decide that they want to empower themselves and leave and offer their testimonials for the world to know about and go through the cathartic process of telling their stories. Now, I would like to offer some stratagems here on how to talk to your friends and family. So I'd like to ask a show of hands. How many of you have friends and family who are in MAGA right now? Okay, it looks like, from the looks of it, it looks like most of you have friends and family who are in MAGA. I've got some don'ts and do's that I'd like to share with you on how to try to rejuvenate some of those relationships. Now, these don'ts and do's are part of a guide that we have called Reaching Out. The Reaching Out guide and our ebook are available at our website. There's no cost to download them. All we ask is that you consider subscribing to our newsletter, and you can get the book and you can get the guide. So everything I'm going to share with you right now, you can get this from our website. So let's go through some don'ts, shall we, on what not to do. So the first don't is not to lean heavily on biography, credentials, and expertise. Now, look, experts have made our country and our world a better, safer, and healthier place. But the unfortunate reality is that in MAGA, learning is not cultivated. It is not encouraged. Now, that is not because people in MAGA lack intelligence or integrity. I believe that most people in MAGA, I believe most of your friends and family deep, deep down are good people. I will tell you from my time in MAGA that any information that even remotely refuted the pervasively held beliefs and mythologies of the community, that information was shunned, it was kept out. So there is something of an anti-science and anti-education component within the MAGA ethos. And that's why leaning on expertise and biography and credentials, it doesn't tend to move the needle because people in MAGA look at experts as people who do not have their best interests in mind. So that's our first don't. The second don't is not to attack, question intelligence, or impugn integrity. So what's an example of this? Now, maybe some of you have found yourself saying this to some of your friends and family, but maybe you've said, after hearing something that you knew was false, how could you believe that? The way that question is construed, it tends to be interpreted as an undermining of someone's intelligence. I know that that's not what you and what others who say it mean, but it is how people take that kind of interaction and that kind of question. So we want to avoid attacking, impugning integrity, or questioning intelligence. Another don't is not to criticize other MAGA Americans because critiques will be taken personally. I have a story I want to share about that. I was at an event in February, not a Trump-friendly event. And there was a lady there who came up to me. I had a Leaving MAGA table as an exhibitor. And she said to me, "Rich, my husband, who's a Trump voter, is here with me right now." And I said, "Well, I want to meet him. Bring him over to me." So he came over. His name was George. And I said, "George, I just want to let you know, you can see I have a table Leaving MAGA. So you probably can figure out pretty quickly how I feel about the president and the MAGA movement. But I want you to know that I don't think you're a racist or a homophobe or a misogynist or a xenophobe. And he chuckled a little bit and he said to me, and Rich, I don't think that you're a commie pinko socialist libtard. So we had a laugh about this, and I said, great. So we got to talking, and we actually didn't talk about politics. We were talking about our time growing up in New York. But there was something that he said to me that I incorporated into this don't, which is he said to me that when he hears attacks against other Trump voters, he takes that personally. And that's why it's a good idea to avoid criticizing other MAGA Americans, because those critiques are going to be taken personally. Now, here's another don't, and this, I think this is a big one in particular. If I could ask again a show of hands, how many of you in your conversations with your friends and family in MAGA have tried to, let's say, debate or have a conversation with facts and with policy? Okay. Now, since I can't hear you, if you would nod for me, has anyone had some success with that approach? Okay. All right. I see a thumbs down. Okay, I see the thumbs down there. Now look, everyone has done this. Okay, I've done it. Facts and policy don't move people because we as a Homo sapien species do not make decisions based on facts. And we don't tend to make decisions on what we might call reality. We make decisions based on feelings, emotions, and perceptions. So when someone says something and you know that it's false, you know that it's inaccurate, you know that it's, for example, something that I might have believed in my time in MAGA, here's a question to ask someone. Ask them whatever it is that you hear, where did you hear that from? Now ask it, of course, as I know all of you would, which would be respectfully and with dignity, but ask them, where did you hear that? And here's why that question has, in my experience, worked. It's because it gets people thinking about the source origin of whatever information it is that they believe. I have myself and someone else, we are in the process of developing a media literacy workshop that's entitled, Where Did You Hear That? And the idea of it is to deconstruct beliefs, lies, and mythologies that are just pervasive across the country. So as part of Where Did You Hear That? There's another strategy that you can also engage in, which is if you are willing to read a story that they provide, ask them if they're willing to read a story that you would provide, whatever the topic might be. So think of it as like a bartering system. You read a story they give you, and then you get them to agree without pressure to read a story that you provide them, and then get a chance to compare notes and then compare facts. That potentially would have, you would gain more ground potentially doing that than debating facts and policies. And then the last don't, which is related, and again, I would say that probably myself included, a lot of us have done this. Our other don't is don't try to change the other person's mind or bait them into an argument. I've got another very uplifting story related to this don't. So at our website, we have almost 20 testimonials of people who went through a variety of journeys and eventually left MAGA. There's one lady named Stefania Messina. Stefania's exposure to MAGA came through her Christian nationalist church. And her belief, just as her fellow parishioners at the time had believed, was that Donald Trump was sent by God to save America. That is what she believed at the time. Stefania, over the last many, many months, has had numerous conversations with her brother and with her mother, both of whom voted for Trump in 2024. I am happy to report that after utilizing these don'ts and do's and I'll share the do's in a moment, but I'm happy to report that after utilizing these don'ts and do's, neither her mother nor her brother any longer support the president. And both of them and both of them left MAGA because she didn't try to bait her mother and brother into any kind of argument and didn't try to change their minds. People's minds change when they decide to make the change as individuals. No one can make another person change. We can offer support, which is what we do at Leaving MAGA. We can offer guidance. We can be a safe space. But ultimately, the change must come from within the individual. And Stefania exhibited immense patience in working with her mother and her brother, and they left. And it reminds me of a quote from the book of Romans, to be patient in affliction. Stefania exhibited that patience in the affliction of her mom and her brother. So I'm really happy to report that to everyone, to let you know that we now have family members who are leaving MAGA as a result of our Leaving MAGA leaders. Now let's go over some do's. We went over some don'ts. Let's go over some do's on how to try to rejuvenate some of those relationships with your friends and family. The first do on what to do is try to find and search for relatability and common ground. There's something remarkable that happens if an anti-MAGA person and a pro-MAGA person have a long enough conversation and they find that they actually agree on a lot of issues. I mentioned at the outset that I helped Donald Trump divide our country. The divisions are what keep us at each other's throats, because finding common ground is not as much of an alluring story as the divisions are. But if you have a long enough conversation with someone who is a pro-MAGA person, you will discover that many of the same concerns and hopes and dreams and fears are shared amongst each other. So that's the first do about finding relatability, finding common ground. It doesn't have to be political. Sometimes it's okay to avoid politics if you feel that it's best, but we don't want to do that, right? Because we want to be talking to each other. We don't talk to each other enough, and these don'ts and do's are designed to have more productive, lower temperature conversations. Now, another do, and this one in particular, I think is especially pertinent, which is try to understand why they believe what they believe. Now, this one in particular, sometimes I've received some pushback on it. And the reason for that is because as part of our polarization in the country, I think a lot of times when we ask people to try to understand beliefs that they disagree with, there's this phobia that if you try to understand, then it must mean that you're agreeing with the person, or you're defending the belief, or you're accepting it, or you're concurring with it. But that's not what I'm asking you to do. In asking you to try to understand why someone believes what they do, that doesn't mean that you have to abdicate your principles. That's not what I would ask of any of you to do that. But if in trying to understand why they believe what they do, it brings us to another opportunity of asking them where they hear and where they heard some of their beliefs in their source origin of material. Folks, I think that mis and disinformation has reached a national crisis level in America. And And that those lies that are all around us, which come so often from MAGA media, the reason that they're so effective is because of the message discipline. Whether you're listening to a Turning Point, or you're listening to the president and the vice president, or or a story from Breitbart, which is a site that I lived on when I was in MAGA, the lies work. And that doesn't mean that we can't combat them, even though there are so many of them. So try to understand why someone believes what they do. That gives us a chance to delve a little deeper into why someone is misinformed. I don't personally like the phrase low information voter. All of us are inundated with information on a day-to-day basis. I prefer more looking at this from the perspective of an accurately informed voter. People who consume mostly right-wing media are not accurately informed. And I'm not suggesting that those who consume non-right-wing media are always accurately informed either. But I know from my time in MAGA, because of what I believed in it and the falsehoods that I believed, that trying to understand why someone believes what they do, it also gives us a chance to discover what kind of media they're consuming. Another do is, and this comes back a little bit to what Stefania did, is to have a respectful back and forth dialogue. Now, undoubtedly, a lot of you have seen stories over the last many months about Trump voters losing their jobs, or farmers who voted for Trump losing grants, and people who are suffering because of Trump voters who are suffering now because of cuts to the federal government. I would ask everyone to try to resist the temptation of saying, I told you so. There's a meme that goes around. It's not church language, so I won't see it, but it's something find out. And the idea of it is, well, look at these Trump voters. They supported this and they're now getting what they deserve. I don't have a problem with people enduring the repercussions of their choices. But I think saying I told you so, what it does is it pushes people further into MAGA. And we want to extract them out of MAGA, especially those who are having doubts right now. Because, folks, I want to tell you that I don't think there has ever been a time more so than right now where there are more MAGA Americans having doubts. And that's an opportunity for all of us, if you're so inclined, to present them with what the work of what Leaving MAGA is doing. So the respectful back and forth dialogue, it means sometimes refraining from the I told you so's and that kind of language that is going to alienate and estrange those who are in MAGA, when we don't want them to dig their heels, and we want them to consider leaving. And then the last do that I would offer is to ask permission to introduce the possibility of reconciliation. Reconciliation is a really key component of Leaving MAGA's work. In addition to developing leaders, in addition to people leaving and empowering themselves and telling their stories, reconciliation is a really key part. And I would like to close with this. I would ask for all of you to please not give up on your friends and family. When I left MAGA, I decided to reach out to those with whom I had lost contact. And I lost contact with them because I had that new MAGA second family. And part of the reason I lost contact with a lot of longtime friends is because I knew that they were blue Democratic voters. And I went to them and I said that I was sorry, and I asked if they would consider my apology. Every single one of them accepted my apology. And one in particular said to me, Rich, I always knew that you would come back. So I would ask, please, that you not give up on your friends and family. The good people they were before Trump and MAGA, I have no doubt they are still those good people. And all of us can do something that the book of Isaiah instructs us to do, which is to bring good news to the afflicted. I would ask that all of you consider being good news messengers and not give up. And if we do that, I do believe over time, there can be a Leaving MAGA exodus of those who are in the community now who decide that there's one lie too many or one unnecessary death too many. And they know that you can be there for them as people to turn to without judgment and without ostracization. And that is how we strengthen our relationships, our communities, and how we strengthen our democracy as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rich.
Thank you for listening to this episode. To get involved, please visit indivisible.org to find our Lehigh Valley Bethlehem chapter. You can also see videos on our YouTube channel for Indivisible Lehigh Valley Bethlehem. Stay tuned for future podcast episodes.